All right. Hello, React Native developers. What is going on? Today I am joined with the one and only Evan Bacon. Bacon, you are calling in from beautiful Palo Alto, California. Is that correct?
I am calling in from Palo Alto, yes.
Cool. Where is your office actually in Palo Alto?
It's on University, which is like the kind of center street of Palo Alto,
Mm.
uh, by the Apple Store, kind of.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. I lived there for a couple of years ago. So, what's your favorite food joint in this area?
Oh man, so we have like Amazon, and I just get a lot of this Soylent, and I just
Ooh.
live off of this.
Oh
So
no.
yeah,
Really?
yeah, yeah. That's about all I eat.
So why do you like it? It sounds pretty awful.
Cause like you can like keep programming, and then you can just like and then survive, and like you don't get hospitalized or anything. So it's great.
Oh my gosh. And yeah, so you've been pretty busy lately, right?
Yeah, I've been doing a lot of web stuff lately.
And yeah, you published some demos this week, and I was like pretty blown away. So lately you guys have updated the Snack Expo, and people started to see a web tab, so you can run it on web. But when I would publish, can it be done in React Native video? People will say, "Oh, I see the web stuff appeared, but it doesn't work." But it sounds like this might change, maybe.
Yeah, pretty soon we'll be able to run all of your awesome demos in web, which is really exciting. So we added gesture handler support about a month or two ago, and that is like pretty complicated, but there there wasn't too much you could do with it since Reanimated didn't have a web port. But now we're like starting to slowly roll out the Reanimated port, and a lot of stuff is opening up, and it's pretty cool.
Wow. Okay. So how do you? How I'm like so curious to know how you adapt these APIs to the web, like even just the gesture handler.
Yeah, so gesture handler was very difficult. It took a while to do. It builds on top of something called Hammer.js, but Hammer doesn't have nearly as many like native functionality capabilities as React Native Gesture Handler. So we had to really like almost fork it to build out this very complicated system that has like good cooperability. And then Reanimated was actually much easier in a way, in the sense that like originally Reanimated was built as a JavaScript library, and then it had like the native capability added in, and the native ability kind of mirrors the JS functionality. So there's like native nodes, and there's a JS kind of copy of those nodes. But because there was no reason to keep up the JS part, that kind of like fell to the wayside. So all I had to do was really just go in and restore that JS part, and then make it so that if the native modules are not available, like they aren't in the browser, then it just uses those JS nodes instead. So it works almost identically to how it does natively in the browser.
Cool. I was so excited, so curious. Also, I took a look. I'm gonna have a very silly question because I took a look at your PR and you have the GS node implementation and so on. And I was expecting basically at some point to see a request animation frame where you basically evaluate the node for one frame and you say, okay, here are the values. And I couldn't find where this magic is happening basically.
Right. So I think like the hardest part of this PR was that it was like halfway web was already supported in a way. So I just had to like go in and kind of figure out how the library worked and added it. And so the request animation frame actually already existed, so it's
Ah,
not
that's
in the
why I couldn't
PR.
see it. Okay.
And that is yeah, yeah. So like half of the web stuff already existed. It was just a matter of like making the other half work, which took a while because I had to figure out how the first half worked.
Wow. And I mean, that's mind blowing because in Reanimated, you have the example folder, which is a gold mine if you want to learn Reanimated. I mean, you have everything in there and you have to go and discover it by yourself. It's very exciting. And I mean, you did something which I mean, to me was so crazy. You exported everything to all the demos to React Native Web, basically.
Yeah, so I was basically hitting my head against the wall for like a whole day trying to get Reanimator working, and then like all at once everything worked. So I was equally mind blown.
Is that did you do the process manually, or you had something set up to export all the demos, or you just
Uh,
drunk some Soylent and powerful?
yeah, yeah. I just poured some Soylent on it, and then it all just started working.
And so the React Native web, I think is very exciting. It seems to me like, but you tell me because you're the expert. It seems to me that even like if I have my Expo project on Android and and iOS, we always do the app like for instance in portrait mode, locked, so the weave is static and so on. But suddenly, if you have the React Native web, you need to think about making things responsive, support different device orientation, and so on. So I'm thinking even if you don't have like a web project from the get go, it can make you a better actually Android and iOS developer. Having these things in consideration. Is that
Yeah. So I found that like when I work on any Expo project now, I usually just start with it in the browser because I can then like resize it instead of having to like flip the device, up and down.
yes?
And uh, I also have all the Chrome Dev tools at my disposal, so it's very easy to like debug massive objects of like event data and see what happened or like record the data. So I usually start with just all the high level stuff with Expo Web, and then I'll run it on iOS and Android to refine it, which has sped my whole like development process up by a lot.
Wow, that's exciting. And so that's like okay, doing iOS and Android development. But I feel also like if you have a web project, even though you have no plans to have an Android and an iOS app, it sounds like it could be super useful to do it with React Native and web and Expo.
Uh, Yeah, so ideally, I want it to be at a place where you just can make any website. Like, there's not this kind of weird stigma around building it with React Native Web. Because realistically, React Native Web is just a bunch of primitives, right? Like, if you think of React DOM, you have like a div and a span, and like those are JSX, those aren't actually HTML. So those then bind to HTML, div, and span. Whereas with React Native Web, you've got like the view, and that binds to a div. So you just have like these more agnostic primitives. So there's really nothing that's holding React Native Web back from being something that you build like your full professional website with.
Yeah, I mean I agree because every time after doing React Native development I do React JS vanilla React JS stuff. I'm like, oh my gosh, you have to deal with all the different box models. If you want something to scroll, it's a huge drama. Even some simple gestures, actually, gestures and animations are not so trivial. I was trying to implement like a simple swiper, with a snap,
Yeah.
and if you in React Native, that's like pretty standard to do these things, and like on the web, it's much more complicated.
Yeah, I think Native just has like a much more comprehensive API for handling a lot of these things. Like especially Reanimated is a great example. Um, so you can make things which feel a lot more native in the browser just because the API makes a lot more sense. In fact, someone was building a React.js website the other day, and they were looking for a gesture handler framework, and so I just suggested maybe like try using React Native Gesture Handler, and it worked pretty well for them. So I think like it would be cool in the future if you could also just use these libraries like pick and choose and maybe mix them. Like if you need gestures in your React.js project, just use React Native Gesture Handler.
Yes, is that's exactly what I wanted to ask you. Is it, because so I did this website and I'm pretty happy with it, and I want to have some a simple swiper, and it it seems that with JavaScript and like the components which are available today, it seems to be a complete nightmare. And is there a way I could like plug a React Native web component into my project?
Yeah, so I think like the trickiest part, it comes down to like the Babel preset and then the Webpack config. And so with Expo Webpack config, it's got something called like with unimodules, which is like the bare minimum. So you can take your existing Webpack config and then wrap it in that, and then it will like add support for React Native Web and then all the React Native Web components for the most part. And then You can use Babel Preset Expo if you like. Essentially, just adds support for like removing web code when you don't need it, and then from there, I think you just use the modules like just straight up, just install them and use them. There's probably going to be some weirdness with it because I don't test the modules like in a standard React project and then pull them in. I usually test them in like a larger React Native project, but uh, usually if I find anything which is like preventing that ability to use them agnostically, then I try to like remove that so that you can just mix them however you want. Like any of the Expo modules for the most part can be used in just a standard web project.
Cool. I'm glad we're recording this because I'm definitely gonna replay
Cool.
this 3 or 4 times. But no, that sounds really good. And actually, it's basically what happened, I guess, at the beginning with React Native when you had these native apps which started to incrementally add React Native for some view and so on. And I guess maybe you can potentially do this for some web projects, which I think is kind of super exciting, actually.
Yeah, I'm super excited by it. I love native APIs and being able to use them in the browser, I think
Yeah,
is great. I mean, naturally, you could still use them in the browser, but having like a clear and concise API makes it really nice. Like
yeah.
the battery demo that I built the other day, where you like plug it in, and Goku starts screaming. I've like always wanted to build that, so now I'm able to just with ease make these things.
Cool. And so what's next in terms of React Native Web what are things you're excited about?
So we're gonna be working on the transitions part of Reanimated. So like we got the node part build, but for those who don't know, Reanimated's got two parts. It's got like the nodes, and then it's got the transitioning API. In the transitioning API, you can like wrap components in other components, and then if you change the state, then it will animate whatever state change happens inside of those components. So I need to build that for web, and I'm gonna talk to Christoph over at Software Mansion who like made Reanimated, and we're going to try and figure out like a really nice way to integrate web with that, so that we could potentially use CSS for that part, which would then be like extremely performant, um, and that would enable things like your Safari tabs demo to just work out of the box with Reanimated and web. And then after we merge that, I've got some stuff open to try and like get a potential maps library working in web, which is like really expansive. But
Well,
then mostly just like universal testing stuff and end-to-end testing so that you can like ensure the platforms that you're not focusing on stay working, and then you can just focus on whichever platform is your like main platform for developing on.
wow. Okay, that's yeah,
I
and
know it's a lot.
yeah, um, yeah. I mean, these must be such interesting puzzles to solve to do these adaptations and like, oh yeah, can we use CSS for instance for the transition API because it would make sense. Um, but I guess yeah. I
Yeah,
mean, just yeah,
yeah, it feels like just fun puzzles to work on. Like the fonts API is really nice because like you just inject these elements into like a singular head element, and then you track to ensure that fonts are being loaded correctly. But then it's like completely different. You don't have to touch CSS, and you just do everything from JavaScript. But like being able to figure out if you can match that API in web, and then maybe like changing native so it's more like web, it kind of like creates just a nicer API all around.
yeah. We don't have the baggage of the web is pretty hard, and if you use the React Native web model, you don't have all this baggage for. That's pretty cool. And so, how did you? I'm very curious actually. How did you get started with Expo at the beginning? Because now you do
Um,
these amazing contributions, how did it all get started?
Right. So I was working at this design agency called Frog Design, and I needed to prototype these very complicated builds, and one of them required like streaming audio and video and just things that we couldn't do with web, and so they required native code. But then also like I needed to get the prototypes to people all over the world very quickly, and then I found Expo, and I was just like super in love with it because before then I was just building them with Swift, and then I would download it onto an iPhone, and then we'd like ship it out because that was faster than waiting for the test flight builds to pass, and we would ship iPhones to people like next day delivery. Uh,
Oh my
which
gosh.
was a nightmare. Yeah, it was very stressful. Like, oh man, I think I broke the build, but now the phone is gone. Anyway, so yeah, so when I found Expo, it was just like um, everything I could have ever wanted, and then I just stuck with it. And if it was missing parts, I would just add those because again, it was much easier than any of the alternatives. And then I was just building projects with it in my spare time because I was just really in love with using it in general. So I made like video games like Crossy Road and Minecraft in Expo, and then eventually they reached out to me and asked me if I wanted to like keep working on it, which of course. And now I just work on it all day, every day, adding all the features which I would love to see, love to have, and just things that make I think everyone's lives easier when it comes to like building and making things quickly and in a fun way.
Wow, that's awesome. But when you were working on this early React Native project, it sounded like you needed to ship native code. So how did Expo help you with that at the beginning?
So I would just like try and upstream things to Expo. Like initially, the thing we needed was AV, and so I reached out to them, and then they like added the AV module. And that was all I needed for native code. Outside of that, I just needed the ability to manipulate native APIs, which already existed within like Expo. I also it was a lot of animation driven stuff, and so that just wouldn't work in web. Like things like the flat list. This was around the time that Native Driver came out, so it was very like there was a lot of new cool stuff you could do with like animating lists.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, my very first React Native project, I stumbled on Expo, but because I didn't get started with my first React Native project yet, I didn't know the pain point exactly that Expo was solving, right? So I went ahead and did it without Expo, but of course, the project right after that, I was like, okay, now I get it. Like, I know the pain. And after that, I was like using Expo, all the way every time.
Yeah, especially like when I started using it, Expo, I would always run into these build errors, and I'm like a native iOS and Android developer, so I don't usually run into errors like what I would hit with vanilla React Native, where just things wouldn't work, and I'd have to like delete the project and copy the code over to a new project because it was just totally corrupted. Uh, but we've got like a lot of new stuff in the pipeline with Expo, like these custom builds, the ad hoc builds, and then potentially like the ability to remove modules that you don't want inside of the build. And then in time, we would also add the ability to add modules and then send those to like a build service. And then you could build it in the cloud and then you wouldn't run into these build errors. And then you could have any kind of native code that you wanted in a custom Expo client, which you could then download using your own developer credentials. And it would be like totally streamlined and very quick.
Yeah, I mean these workflows that now you guys are supporting are completely amazing, and also you can run your native app like through the Expo client, and like it's absolutely incredible. And that was great. I mean, we met for the first time at Conf, and that was really great to see the roadmap for Expo and see how you know you were addressing every use cases and so on. It's very very impressive. You guys are doing amazing work. That's for sure.
Yeah, well, I do like the web stuff, like the easy stuff with JavaScript. We've got much better engineers who do like the hard stuff.
Yeah, and I mean, I know you're pretty busy, but I have to say I'm a huge fan of your YouTube channel. But it's not your YouTube channel, right? I think you overtook the Expo YouTube channel.
Oh yeah, I kind of hijacked it and then filled it with my content.
Your sick content. No, I really love your content because I mean the information you're giving to the community is absolutely incredible, and I mean I'm always learning so much from your videos. But what I love is that the videos are like pleasant to watch anyway. So I could show your videos to someone who doesn't know what programming is, who hasn't seen a computer ever, and they would still find the videos pleasant to watch and fun, and like people would still have a good time watching your videos, which I really love that you manage to combine the two things.
Oh wow, thanks. I appreciate it. Yeah, I'm very picky. Like I want them to be educational and informative, but then I also have my little sisters, and I'll ask them to watch the videos, and then if they say like that was really boring, then I get like disappointed. So I try to make it like something that my sisters who do not know how to program can enjoy, and then also like e- educational, so that I can like watch it back and be informed as well.
Yeah, it shows, and that's amazing because I think you're really eating this target perfectly. So that's great.
Oh, thanks, appreciate it. I think like that could be like I think your videos are still like far superior. There's a lot of good content there.
Thanks, man. I really appreciate it. Uh, Evan, I really appreciate you coming on the call this evening. Uh, you
Yeah,
know,
thanks so much for having me.
so excited, and yeah, keep up the good work. What you guys are doing is amazing, and hopefully I get to talk to you soon.
Yeah, definitely. I'll message you when transitioning API is done. I'm really excited to see the Safari tabs demo running in web.
Woo! All right.
Yeah.
Have a nice day,
All right,
man.
take care, dude.
See you. Ciao.